Well, good morning, Ethan. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, good evening to you.
Yeah, for those that don't know you, just tell us who you are and what you care about.
Yeah, so I'm Ethan Storment. I care about a lot of different things, but I think what we'll cover today is probably, I want to touch on China and what's happening on the international stage with them. U.S. currency policy would be great if we get to that, and we can talk politics as well, or whatever else we kind of come across. But those are kind of my main things.
Yeah. What's your background? So what's like if you said kind of in the direction of economy?
Yeah. So I have a bachelor's degree in economics. So I'm no PhD or expert, but I do work in the mortgage industry as well. So I know a little bit about
Yeah.
that, and spend some of my free time, studying on some econ stuff. So I have a decent idea of what's going on at least.
Awesome. So yeah, how would you describe what's happening in 2020 or what's your outlook into the future? More positive or are you very concerned?
Yeah, for the United States, we are, for the first time since 1970, facing stagflation, which is when your economy actually becomes less productive while
Okay.
simultaneously more money is in circulation. And when those two things happen together, it's a rather sticky situation. And
Okay.
we've been here before. It's not something we haven't seen before. When Nixon took us off the gold standard in the early 70s there, it caused a decade of inflation of 9-10%.
Wow.
And personally, I think that if we're not careful, we could really end up back there. And what concerns me the most is that no one seems to think that. Like the people who are at the helm of this, like Jerome Powell came out and it's just like, oh, we're just going to let inflation run. Like we think it's fine. And it's like that's great. But the problem with that, in my opinion, is that it typically, when you look at the empirical data, takes, a year to 2 years or sometimes up to 5 years, right, for an expansion of money supply to end up causing inflation for consumers. And so if you're totally fine with letting inflation run now, it's like, well, that's great if we felt the effects right away,
Yeah.
but we don't, which brings me like Milton Friedman, he thought for the longest time, and this is the analogy he always uses, that printing money is like drinking, right? And
Okay.
that like while you're doing it, it feels great. Like everything's great while you're
Yeah.
printing money.
Yeah.
It's when you stop that there's a problem.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we're at right now. I think right now America is drunk on printing money. We haven't stopped printing money since 2008. We've been in QE since then. And we haven't really felt the effects of that yet. And we're going to have to wake up with one heck of a hangover, and it's not going to be fun.
Okay.
That's my take of where we are. And then you add coronavirus, where we printed an extra, a set of quantitative easing. The CARE Act was, $3 trillion. Our M2 money supply increased the fastest it ever has, while unemployment shot through the roof and our GDP fell by 20%. And so that's where stagflation is coming in. It's like if we're not as productive and there's more money in circulation, that means that every dollar is worth significantly less in actual goods
Yeah.
than it was before, because there has to be a give somewhere.
Yeah. So even though we can't really feel or see any repercussions of that yet, you just think it's because we're printing that much money, it will take a few years until it's actually felt how the effects of it.
Right. And this has to do with like the way we print money, because it's easy to just say like, oh, what does the US do? Like, well, the US prints money, but that's not, it's
Yeah.
much more complicated than that, right?
Yeah.
It's the Federal Reserve isn't even owned by the federal government. So, and that's the place in the US that can print money.
Yeah.
So when we go to print money, right, we don't do that through, like, it's not like Congress passes a bill and says, hey, we'd very much like to print, $3 trillion, even for the CARE Act. When they passed that bill, what happened was they had to borrow $3 trillion worth of debt, which they're going to go ahead and sell bonds to get the
Okay.
money for this. So who are they selling these bonds to? It becomes a very important question, right?
Yeah. And the answer is
The answer is it's a large swath of people,
okay.
right? So it's China used to buy some. They've decided they're not buying them anymore because
Okay.
they're mad at us. And the rest of the world, buys some. pretty much unanimously, we are kind of the world reserve currency right now. Almost all countries are holding at least a little bit in U.S. bonds. So that increases our demand quite a bit. And then you have private investors here in the U.S., banks particularly like these bonds, and banks have a lot of money, especially right now. So they buy them. But the other person who buys them, and here's kind of where the hangover part will, I think, make a lot of sense, is the Federal Reserve. That's how they print money. They don't just print money and then send it off to someone. They print money and then they use that money to buy these bonds. Okay. So what ends up happening when you're printing a bunch of money is when these bonds go to auction, like they literally are auctioned off, right? And the auction price the bonds go for is going to be dependent on their interest rate and what people are willing to pay for that interest rate over whatever term the bonds are. So if they're a 1-year bond, 15, 30, whatever they are, and then they're going to compare that to the interest rate and say, well, I think this is a good yield or this one's not. Yeah. The problem is that if the Federal Reserve is still printing money and then they're using that money to buy those bonds, they're artificially inflating the demand for those bonds. Yeah. So when we stopped doing that, which we stopped doing in November of 2019, okay, so before COVID hit, yeah, we stopped QE and we started to allow the interest rates on these bonds to rise. Because if you're not artificially inflating the demand for these bonds, the only way to get people to buy them is to tell them they're going to get paid a decent wage for them, which is the interest on these bonds, right? Mm-hmm. So the bond rates started going up, and we instantly started feeling the hangover. And Trump was not happy. He's very upset, right? He's like, "You guys let this happen way too fast. We got to wean off the alcohol. We're getting the DTs. This is not good." And so, and so it became an argument there. And then when COVID hit, we went back on the alcohol because we couldn't, or on this QE and buying up these bonds. As a matter of fact, and we upped the dose, right? We were like, all right, we really need, to push some currency out there into the world. And so that's really where we're at now. In my opinion, is that it'll be really interesting to see what happens, because there's lots of factors that will impact the real demand for these bonds. And my concern is that it's just hidden behind this artificial demand that we've created.
Okay, so what you're saying is that we were kind of already in not safe waters before COVID even started. So for the last 10 years, kind of this was building up in a way with printing too much money. And then we tried to actually stop that before COVID hit, but then COVID hit and it just kind of everything went overboard. Is that kind of, or that's how it feels to me. And now we're on a path where in the next few years, it's gonna just get much more worse than it looks like right now, kind of.
Yeah, I'll say this. So it depends on a few different things. And this is why one of the things I mentioned to you that I wanted to talk about is the United States status as the world reserve currency. Yeah. Because this matters a lot, right? It's like, what is the demand for these bonds? Well, if everyone is buying your bonds, right, because they need to hold that in reserves to prop up the value of their currency, right? Also, that demand is a lot. But if that demand drops, and there are other alternatives that are coming out, and this, now we can kind of transition into China a little bit, because they want to be that answer. China's out here screaming from the hilltops, we're the manufacturing capital of the world. We have a higher purchasing power parity GDP than the United States already now, and we're growing significantly faster year over year, right? We want to be that answer. We want to be the solution for the world. Don't invest in the U.S., invest in us, buy our yuan bonds, and allow China to sort of take on that role and take that place. And the European Union is also throwing their hat in the ring and saying, hey, we're big too. And we've got some history along with, some good production in GDP together. But UK kind of lit that on fire a little bit with Brexit, but that's a whole other thing.
All right. So how would you summarize the situation with China? I mean, there's obviously been we've talked about it in some of the last podcast episodes as well, that some people, I think, don't care about China whatsoever. Some people are very concerned. Even I mentioned it before the podcast real quick, watching videos like from Yuri Bezmenov, where if you look at the Soviet Union, was what the communist parties were trying to do back 50 years ago. Mm-hmm. I guess I'm somewhere in the middle, but more also on the concerned side. What's your take on China and the relations to it, and what threat they potentially pose?
Yeah. Right now, one, I would say for starters, the thing that concerns me the most initially is the way China's acting up around their borders. Because what I'm really afraid of, I'm not so afraid as an American who just happens to live in, as far away as possible from China, right? So we're not geographically in the same ballpark. So if they're not an expansionist state and they're not messing with the people around them, as much as it's awful that they have 3 million Uyghurs in concentration camps like they currently do, it doesn't directly impact or affect me. So as much as I want to fight for that, I'm not afraid of it, right? Because it's not happening to me. So I think a good measure of it, and we saw this in World War I and World War II, is that when a country becomes expansionary and says, not only do I want to control my populace and the people around me, but I also would like to take on, in China's case, Hong Kong.
Yeah.
I also would like to take on Taiwan. I would also like to get in border clashes with India. And even their good ally, Russia, they're having a border dispute with now, right? And they're pushing into the East China Sea. So my big concern with China is that they are the manufacturing capital of the world, which World War II showed us that matters, right? Like at the end of the day, if you have the ability to create faster than your enemy, you can do a lot of damage, right? Yeah. And we found out with, the total war philosophy of we're going to take our whole economy and sort of centralize it into making weaponry, which is what Japan did and what Germany did at the time. And we're going to just see what happens. And they were able to do some real damage. So manufacturing is a scary piece to war that I think a lot of people don't think about, right? It's like the ability to manufacture drones in mass right now is a very scary ability on a world stage. Yeah. And China has it. There's no doubt that they have it. We have it too. And Europe has it too, to a certain extent. But at the same time, yeah, it scares me for sure. I'm definitely concerned with that as well. But I don't want to be all doom and gloom. The good news is China is getting in a lot of disputes with its neighbors. And that means that it doesn't have a lot of allies. So yeah. It's sort of this double-edged sword. It's like they're in a position right now where they'd be hard-pressed to make a big move because they don't have the backing from everyone else.
Yeah. So are you concerned about actual kinetic warfare if you're saying you're concerned about them being able to produce a lot of weaponry, etc.? Isn't it kind of the place we're at today that we can't even have like grand scale physical warfare where we're actually throwing bombs at each other, because then kind of the whole planet just goes, we just go extinct?
Well, why not?
No? So you think there's the actual chance of still having kind of a World War III where we actually fight each other as we kind of, not as we used to, obviously, but still physically?
Yeah, I'll put it this way. So like what you're saying is like, okay, so because there's nuclear deterrent, we can't go to war. What I would say back to that is, okay, so let's say, for instance, there's two guys at a bar, okay, and they don't like each other very much, and they get in a dispute. And they both have guns. They both have guns tucked away on their hips. Yeah. It's like they might both not want to fight each other because they both know the other person has a gun, available to them. But if they both make an agreement that they're going to put down their guns and they're going to do some fisticuffs, they can still do a lot of damage. And these are the two biggest, baddest guys at the bar between the U.S. and China and Russia and Europe would likely be involved one way or another, depending on the country and where their allegiances are. I hope with us, but that's a little bit more in question now than it has been previously too, which scares me too.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, I'm not so sure if there would be actual physical warfare, but I'm definitely convinced there's some kind of information warfare been happening for, I don't know, many decades. What's your take? Because we talked about it in episode 1, I think, that this culture war that is kind of seems to be happening in America right now. Do you think China has something to do with that? Do you think they're kind of pulling the strings behind the curtains?
I think they're throwing their hat in their ring when they can. I don't think they have as much influence maybe as some other people might think. Russia's just better at it. If you're going to point your finger at somebody, the first place I would start is Russia. Like you said, has been sending people to infiltrate the United States. So you can argue whether or not they've been successful. I mean, the argument is not whether or not they've done it; it's whether or not they've been successful. Yeah. And they've been doing that for a long time. And so they've probably had more influence than I would say China probably has, just because China's new to this game. They were so caught up in their own stuff. We've been at a Cold War with, the Soviet Union for as long as I've been alive, and much longer. So, yeah, but China throws their hat in the ring. They want to be involved with TikTok, and they want to, and Huawei, they want to be able to spy on us the way that we spy on other people. And they're actively trying to do that.
Yeah. So I want to take it into kind of a different direction. Just generally talking about China, communism, etc. And I want to start this a little different than I usually do, because I'm obviously, I'm very critical of Marxism as well. If you look at history, there's not too many open questions. Like every time Marxism is tried, tens of millions of people just died. It just kind of seems to go hand in hand. You mentioned before that in China right now, you said a number like 3 million people being in working camps. It's probably hard to get accurate numbers, but I don't know. Where do you have that number from? Is that just...
That was the number that Nikki Haley presented to the United Nations. And that was probably about a year ago. So it could be more now. And China admitted to having at least 100,000. But the facility seemed to be significantly larger than that. And even the conservative estimates, I think, were on over 1 million.
And I mean, if you look at books like Gulag Archipelago and you kind of understand what communist working camps really look like, I mean, there's not much to talk about if that's a good thing or a bad thing. The question that kind of came up to me in the last couple of weeks after watching 13th on Netflix, which is, we talked about it real quick before, about mass incarceration. And the question to me comes up, if you in America have about or over 2.5 million people in prisons or in jail, many of them also used for labor. By the way, do you have any idea how many people are actually used for labor in American prisons? Because that's something I have not yet found out.
I don't know that number, but from my understanding, and I've known a few people that worked at prisons, that it's reasonably low, and normally actually being let out for labor is considered a perk in U.S. prisons because you get to go out and do something in the community, and it's actually used as a rehabilitation mechanism. Whereas I would argue that in China it's very different because this is very forced labor versus volunteer people that want to get back out and want to make change.
Yeah. Okay. Still, there's definitely some concern with the American prison system, especially because it used to be a lot private. I'm not so sure. I think the trend there is not as clear if you're actually moving away from private prisons, or if that's what that's looking like. Anyways, in the last 30, 40 years, after watching the movie, for me, it definitely feels like this. The 13th Amendment was definitely somewhat abused, and just to get people in these prisons en masse, and also for private corporations actually to make money off of it, which is just that's mind blowing. For me, if you compare that to China, even if in China they have 3 million people in working camps, if you kind of compare that to America with also 2.5 million people, not in working camps, but in prisons. And if you look at the prisons, there were built, a lot of them seems to be for profit for these private corporations. So they're definitely not ideal, ideal systems in order to rehabilitate criminals and to kind of get them to a better life. I don't think that's the main purpose for these prisons, but to lock them away and to kind of profit even off of it. So if even America is doing that to a pretty substantial degree, if we look at more than 200 million people and 2 million people, and they're definitally not also not
population, right? So China's got 1.3 billion, right? Yeah. We're 330 million. So you're talking about as a percentage, and this is the argument that the CCP would make, right? It's let's talk about America's issues with incarceration as well. I think it's a misstep to conflate the two for a variety of reasons. And the first thing that I would say is, well, and before we even get into it, let me start with this. This is not me saying that America doesn't have issues with the criminal justice system.
Yep.
There's massive criminal justice reform that has to happen here.
Yep.
And I think that both sides of the aisle are down for that. And you talk to people, you see the legislation has a lot of support. Unfortunately, the two sides of the aisle can't agree about what needs to change and how it needs to change.
Yeah.
And so there's some issues there. But on that note, so one of the reasons that I think that it's a conflation is that, one, that doesn't represent China's entire prison population. Okay, when we're talking about the Uyghurs, right, we are talking about a specific group in a specific area, and these people aren't being arrested for committing a felony possession of, even if it's a felony possession of marijuana, which is a charge I completely disagree with that as a felony. I don't think it should exist. But they knew that law was on the books and it existed. And then they committed that felony. They got caught by a police officer in the act of committing that felony. They got put in front of a jury of their peers of 12 people and a judge who was ruling this is admissible and this is not. And there are multiple ways to, get off on crimes in the United States of America. And then a jury of 12 of their peers convicted them of a crime.
Yeah.
Right. In China, when they
I gotta say, if I may interrupt you for a second, like what it looks like in the movie in 13th is that in America, even like a lot of, especially black people that have been arrested for something, they don't actually go to trial, but they're kind of pushed to kind of just accept the deal and take 3 years in prison in order to not get to trial where they could get 10 years or whatever. Just as a concern that there is obviously some things are happening there which should not be.
Well, and that's a whole other conversation to me, because you want to talk about district attorneys intentionally overcharging people to scare them into plea deals. I think it's like 95% of cases in the United States of America currently do not go to trial.
Wow, 95%.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know the specifics. I just think that and everybody, like with Black Lives Matter, everybody's talking about police brutality. For me, police brutality is like the surface, but then at every step down the line, there just seems to be some kind of bias against Black people, which is kind of my take. But keep going. Thank you.
Yeah. And so, and what we should really touch on, that's a whole, let's get back to China if we could, and then let's talk about race, because it's hard to do both. It's a big issue. But because, I think you're right. But, and we can talk about why that is possibly and go from there. But on the China front, these people are getting thrown into camps and they're treated significantly worse from what we can tell. There was a lady talking about how she got electroshocked with a cattle prod into the back of her neck for not doing the things that she was supposed to be doing. If a guard at an American prison got caught doing that, I mean, they would go to jail for assault, right? And that's part of the difference. And then the other thing is that there was we have Chinese Communist Party documentation that says that Communist Party members can go into the homes of people who are put into these concentration camps and sleep in the same bed as their wives while they're gone. If it's a man who's gone, they sleep in the same bed as their wife. And and the wife has to legally permit that to happen, or she's in violation of the law. I mean,
these are official laws?
Yeah. Yeah, there was, it's really fascinating though. Yeah, it's crazy. And not to mention, if you look at just we're not targeting people based off of political dissension. In the United States, as politically frustrating as we are, and as much as private businesses are targeting people for political dissension, like you might not be able to get a job at a place you want to based off of what you believe, but the government is not coming to your home with guns, throwing you in a cage and having sexual relations with your wife while you're gone because you violated, what they thought was the sanctity of their party. So they're very different. We have our problems, no doubt. But yeah,
it kind of depends on what you compare it to, and I think China is not really If anybody makes American prisons look good, then it's probably China, I would say.
Yeah.
Because Yeah, and if for anybody listening, if you can't imagine in China anything terrible happening, or those working camps or whatever, if you're concerned they're treated as humans, read Gulag Archipelago and get your fantasies going of what's happening in those kinds of camps, because it's absolute. Yeah, it's. I've been in Auschwitz before. I've seen what happened in the Holocaust, and it's tragic beyond belief. Like it's terrible. But the Soviet Union, like, I feel like that system was even more corrupt from the inside, and I mean, if you were a Jew in the Holocaust, like, yeah, you had as much trouble. But in the Soviet Union, it seems like just everybody was fucked, period. Like, it doesn't matter who you are, as long as you're not a thief, basically, then you're not helping the establishment, which is ridiculous.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. It just goes to show, it's like, this isn't special to, one group of people or one society. I mean, the people that are like, well, America will never go there. Yeah, I think we should wake up a little bit. Like, hold on, we're perfectly capable of this. Yeah. I think we're all perfectly capable of doing some really evil things, given the right circumstances, and you have to be, really wary of that. Otherwise,
we don't want to repeat some of the things that happened in the last century. That's for sure. How do you see this situation with China evolve in the future? Like, what do you see going forward?
Yeah, it really depends. And it's really not going to depend. It'll depend on us, of course. Like, we'll have a role to play for sure. But really the bottom line is are they going to choose to be an expansionist state? Okay. And then it's going to come down to, what is the rest of the world going to do? Like, let's say for instance, tomorrow China woke up and said, no, we're taking back Taiwan. We want it. It's ours. We're taking it back. The way that Germany, right, World War II took over Austria. Right? It's like, this used to be that would be the same type of argument that you'll hear, right? It would be, this was ours, you took it away from us, fuck you, we're taking it back, right? Would the rest of the world really stand up and really go, okay, this is the point where we need to step forward? It's a real question, and I think what China is doing right now is very intentionally testing the waters for that, and to see what is everyone's appetite for this. Like, what happens? Okay, you say that, the East China Sea has to be for everybody. U.S., you're over here sending big warships and you're patrolling and you think you're the big bad. Well, what happens if we start building islands out into the sea to increase our range? And then we're going to put military equipment on those islands, right?
That is happening right now?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you can watch the videos of islands that are forming in front of your eyes. China literally has, massive ships taking dirt from inland China, right, and loading it up onto these ships and then pouring it into the ocean until an island form. Then they're building military bases on the islands.
Wow.
Because under international law, and I forget what the mileage is, but you get a certain amount of sea based off of where your outermost piece of land is.
Okay.
So China thought they'd be clever. We'll just change where our outermost piece of land is. If anybody disputes it, we'll put a military base there, so that way they can dispute it, they're very confrontational. When we just had an ambassador go to Taiwan, they flew, I believe they flew jets. They did some type of military exercise. I think it was jets, but don't quote me on that, over Taiwan, because they wanted to show us, like, hey, we can reach you here. If you want to come to Taiwan and think that you're going to talk to this, what they're still claiming is their sovereign territory. Right? China still claims that to this day. Yep. You're going to acknowledge them as a country and do this. Well, we can hit you from here. We can kill whoever you send. And they wanted to make that clear.
Crazy. For me, one of the biggest questions around all of this, why is nobody talking about it? Why is it so, like, in society, it's just not a topic? Like, especially, we've talked about this before, but especially with things like Gulag Archipelago, like, that's one of the most important literary, one of the most important books of the last century. And everybody knows the Holocaust. Nobody knows gulags. Nobody knows the dangers of communism. Why? What's your take on it? Why is that? Or why could that be?
Yeah, because it's got real good PR. It's got a real good PR here in the U.S. It really does. And people people always do this thing, even when you're talking to people who hate communism, they always do this thing and they say like, well, it started with really good intentions, right? It started, and people emphasize with that. When you start with something and say, well, it started with really good intentions. Let me tell you something right now. Anybody who wants to hand the means of production over to the government doesn't have good intentions. They have very, very bad intentions. And they can say otherwise, and that's fine, but they're either being duped or tricked, or they genuinely have bad intentions.
Or I think, and don't underestimate, they might just be naive and just think that they have good intentions and kind of not even be aware of underlying like unconscious intentions. I don't think that all of these people are consciously aware that they're kind of, we talked about this before as well, like what their intentions really are, we can talk about, but I think there's some people that are consciously thinking, this is all for the good. How much actually is for the good, but
they intend to send police and military personnel to your home to take your goods away from you and to give them to someone else. That is not... that is not good intentions, man. Those are some very bad intentions.
Ethan, you don't understand. If we have a good Marxist system, everybody will give it away for free. It would be all just peace, and there will be rainbows everywhere, and it will be all one peaceful. They would just hand it off. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, my favorite. I got in an argument actually once with a Marxist on Twitter, and it was a good exchange. So I'll kind of share the outline of it with you. And Marx's big argument was that capitalism does a really bad job because very few people own all the means of production. Yeah. Right. And at the time Marx was writing this, by the way, very, 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 very fundamentally true. However, not so true today. So I get this conversation with this guy and on Twitter, who's a random person who just wanted to engage in some conversation, or arguing or whatever you want to call it. And we started talking, and he said, what about, the means of production, and what about, capitalism? And I responded with, well, 50%, or actually it's a little over 50% of Americans, own stock in the stock market. Okay. And anybody with $5 can go on Robinhood right now and buy a piece of stock, or at least a portion of a stock, and own some means of production. You can buy $5 worth of means of production right now. Yeah. Any human person can go do that. And so the great part about capitalism is that if you would like to own the means of production, then feel free. Go ahead. We've actually done this much better than socialism or communism ever have. Take your $20. Go buy a share in something. Yeah. And then you own it. Congratulations, you've done it. You've overcome Marx's whole argument. Right? And within a capitalist system, we don't have to send people to people's houses with guns to do this. It's very simple. It's like people need to take their money and invest in positive things, and good things will come out of it. Yeah.
So you brought up stocks, by the way. From an economical perspective, like how do you see the stock markets globally or American? Like how do you see that evolve? Because I started this year as well, investing in some stocks just for, to try and get my toes in the water. And for the last 200 years, it probably was one of the best investments you could have. Like every year, I think about 7% is what you can expect. Now in the last few weeks or months, I got kind of concerned, and what I did is just take what I made in the last few months and just sold it all to just be safe and feel safe. What's your take? Like, how do you see the stock market evolve in the next time, especially with Corona at the moment?
Yeah, well, I don't think it's going anywhere. I wouldn't be too concerned about the 6% or the 7%. Look. That's an average over a long period of time, and there's been some bad years and some good years, and there will be bad years and there will be good years, and that's just life. It's just going to happen. I like Warren Buffett's advice. Anybody, if you're going to invest in the stock market, treat it like you're owning a business. Don't treat it like I'm going to try and go in and figure out, I'm watching the candlestick and the swing trades, and if you're into that, and some people make money doing that, but just know that that's a zero-sum game. Which means that there is no actual net good coming out of it. Like you're just literally trying to defeat the market at trading, right? Which is doable, but it's very difficult. Or you can do what Warren Buffett suggested. It's like buy it like you're buying a business. Like same thing you would do to buy a local farm. Like, oh, do I like the farmer? Check out the CEO. Oh, does he have a lot of cows? Look at their balance sheet.
Yeah.
What are they
Interesting.
doing? What's their product? Pay attention. Pick something you like, and then pick something you understand, preferably, and say, all right, I believe that this business is going to work out over the next 5 to 10 years. Do that, throw your money in it, and then just forget about it. Pretend like it doesn't exist. Don't watch the ticker. Don't stare at the thing. That's my opinion. Because when you do that, right, and you're like, it went down 5% or went up 8% or whatever else, you start freaking yourself out a bit.
Yeah. Interesting. Very, very interesting approach as well. Maybe if we talk about it already, an advice that I was given, as you said before, like to actually beat the market as a single person. Like if you haven't studied it all your life, there's just no chance. Like you either are get lucky and you get some good stocks, or you don't and you just lose it. Like I don't think as a person that hasn't done this all their life, you can't just pick stocks every day and just randomly trade and expect to win or to win big even.
99.7% of trades currently on the stock market in the US are done through high frequency trading algorithms. Okay.
99.7%
of the volume, right? So because these algorithms trade mass, remember, these are not like, think about who puts these together. And the banks are hiring the brightest minds in physics, in math, in engineering, in economics, in finance from Harvard and Stanford and all these places, and they're bringing them in to write these algorithms. And if you think that you can beat them, best of luck to you, man. Like I really do wish I hope you can, because it'd be really cool. But it's a difficult thing to do.
Don't.
And set it and forget it is my philosophy. It's like, just let it go.
Yeah. What was or maybe just to these algorithms, etc. as well. What I was told, and was a striking example to me, is that these companies, they look at things like at satellite images from Walmart parking lots just to see how many people are going to Walmart, or they're looking at chips and how deep they go to see like how much material do they have on board and things like that, which are just mind blowing. Which you as one person, you never have a chance to even start to pull something like that off. Right. So basically, what you're doing is just you're making wild bets on random stocks that you, compared to your competitors, you have no idea about. Like it's just
you're gonna know less. Well, I had a friend who's a Wall Street insider, I'll say, and he's a part of a hedge fund out in New York. And I really asked him, like, when you go to buy like a company, like, do you get to go and like talk to the CEO and like interview? And he's like, yeah, absolutely. Right. I mean, just being in that room, and they get to look at their books, and not just their ones they file with the SEC, but their full books, right? And they get to sit down and have a conversation with the CEO about where this company is headed. And they get to, meet their top level exec team and their employees. And if you think, once again, that you're beating that guy with sitting on your couch, in Arizona where I am, like, good luck. Once again, good luck. Like it's a hard thing to do.
Yeah. So. What was suggested to me as an alternative is buying ETFs, and that's actually what I did. Most of my money was in ETFs, so like the MSCI World. I think some kind of, what was the? Yeah, I don't remember the second one. What's your take on that? Is that kind of, for me, that's kind of how I understood it. If you take ETFs, you're basically betting on the market as such to rise, so you don't have kind of the risks in picking stocks. What's your take on that?
Yeah, so you're part of the ETF bubble, according to Michael Burry. Okay. Have you ever seen The Big Short?
I don't think I have. It rings a bell, but I don't think I did.
The Big Short? Anybody who has, it's the movie about the 2008 financial crisis.
I think I have seen that, but it was a while ago. I think I've seen it, but it's been like a year or two.
Steve Carell, Christian Bale, and Christian Bale plays Michael Burry, who's the hedge fund investor with one eye, who is the doctor, and is the first person to like really bet on this. Like he's the first person to realize that this was happening. And he created the shorts because they didn't exist before Michael Burry on mortgage bonds. So he literally invented a financial instrument in the process. But that guy came out and he thinks that ETFs are a bit of a bubble right now. And the reason being is because people are realizing that it's really hard to day trade. And people like Warren Buffett are telling them, well, just go pick some stocks and bet on the market, and the market will go up by 6 or 7% a year, which is good advice, and it's fundamentally true. The problem with that is that in investing, when everyone listens to the same advice, it becomes bad advice because the price is set by demand. So when everyone has the same demand for the same product, right, all of a sudden that can inflate the price, and that product that was undervalued can now be overvalued. Yeah. And that's what Michael Burry's argument is against the ETFs. So it's not that they're bad. What I would say is that what they're finding is that in an ETF, people typically buy, if I had to guess, you probably bought into the S&P 500 ETFs, which is where it's like, we're just going to take, a weighted average of the S&P 500. We're going to use that. And then when the S&P 500 moves up, then your portfolio will move up by the same amount, just on a much smaller scale, right?
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. There really isn't, other than a lot of people are buying them right now, which means they might be a little overpriced.
Okay, interesting. So your take would just be kind of look at a company that you actually like and think that has potential and just invest and kind of leave it be for a few years, which was kind of, by the way, the same advice that I got. Investing in stocks is not like day trading or even for a couple of weeks or months, even though I kind of changed my mind on it for to some degree because I was concerned. But if you do it for 5 years, for 10 years, and really like you have to play the long game, because as you said, like all the other day traders, those algorithms, they just have so much more information than you.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. Okay. Any more words to the economy thing? Otherwise, I would let's continue with the race debate that we kind of left hanging there.
All right. Yeah. Let's go to race. Let's. I'm down.
How did this I guess culture war in America happen? Why is race such a hot issue right now? And why do you think, or what's at the core of it for you?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, I would say that it always has been.
Fair.
In the United States of America, we are the most diverse nation in the world, which is a label that I wear very proudly. Unfortunately, human beings have not been super great at treating other human beings who don't happen to look like them or talk like them or whatever else in the best ways possible throughout the history of humanity. And taking on that level of diversity comes with, and this is what people don't like to talk about, but it comes with natural fundamental problems that are going to occur. Yeah. And it has to. People are wired to not like each other based off of these silly little characteristics, and it's crappy, but it is what it is. Yeah. And so you can do your best to combat it. But yeah, we're where we're at now because, okay. So more specifically, and I think this is probably closer to what you're asking for. So that's the broad context, right? That's like the historical, but what's gotten us to where we are today is there has been this crossover between like these Marxist ideals and intersectionality. And someone very clever along the way came along and said, hey, I know Marx was arguing, in the Communist Manifesto that class was the big issue, but class can really be substituted for race. And then you really have the modern radical left platform, right? Like that's really what they're saying, is that class and race have been essentially tied together due to systematic discrimination, right? For a long period of time. And due to that tie, right, there needs to be an upheaval of the system because there is this systemic discrimination against people based off of their race. And that's the argument fundamentally, without trying to straw man it at all, that I think that they're making. People could probably make it better than me, but that's what I would, say from their side.
Could you explain the term intersectionality? I'm not sure if I'm 100% familiar with it.
Sure. So intersectionality is this political ideology that basically states that your level of victimhood in society can be determined by your character traits, right? Your immutable characteristics. And so, for instance, if you are let's say an Asian man, okay, you face more discrimination than a white person. That being said, you wouldn't face as much discrimination as a black man, right? Who might not face as much discrimination as a black woman. Let's say, for instance, there was a black woman who happened to be, gay. Now we've got a black gay woman. She's going to face more than the black woman. And then a black gay midget, what, right?
Yeah.
Be the king of this sort of hierarchy of, you have faced these things, right? Based off of these immutable characteristics that are causing you to be in the situation you're in.
So it's basically the argument saying that there shouldn't be any hierarchies, but we have to clearly distinguish between black and white, man and woman, straight and gay, etc. And I think, I don't want to get too much in because this is obviously very deep water, but there's obviously some problems that come with it. So why did it kind of escalate this year with the Black Lives Matter and the protests and everything? Do you think it had to do with COVID as well? That kind of people weren't really, or they just needed a reason to kind of get out and do something?
Yeah. So, I mean, let's take all the risk factors for riots into consideration, right? So what do we know? We know that for people to riot, right, they have to have free time. You can't riot while you're at work. That's for damn sure, right? It's like you have to be.
There would be ways to just riot at the workplace, but different.
Yeah, you're not keeping your job, right? Exactly. So I think that the mass unemployment matters. Yeah. Absolutely, that it definitely matters. But it's not just that. I mean, there have been these arguments that are kind of been coming to a head for a long time, and they just sort of came to a head at a time when something horrible happened. George Floyd was killed in a horrible way, and for the first time, right, in a long time, these protesters and things had confirmation from the other side. Okay, and I think the other side really thought, like, okay, well, this is like one that we agree with. We're on the same page, and we'll come out and we'll say, hey, this was very bad, and then everyone will agree that it's very bad, and we'll all move on with our lives. And what ended up happening is once that was agreed to by the other side a bit, they took that as, well, see, look, even you agree now. That's how bad this one was, and so now we're more justified to take further action than previously, right? Which is bad because to me it creates an incentive for the right to not actually condemn police shootings when they're wrong, because as soon as they do, look what happens. Like the guy's in jail. Like he was indicted. Like, what are you're literally burning down businesses over a police officer who was indicted for a crime that he committed, and we're all glad that he got indicted. Like, what are you against? Like, who are you fighting against here? The whole system worked in exactly the way you wanted it to.
I mean, they probably would have wanted him to be immediately arrested and just put away. I think it took like 3 days or something. But where I definitely do agree is then, like, I saw memes on Facebook with infinite injustice. That was kind of the core of it. That because I don't even understand it, because if you look at infinite injustice, that just means you have no idea what happened in the Holocaust. You have no idea what happens in China right now. You have no idea what happened in the Soviet Union in the last century, or in many other places around the world. If you compare the officer getting arrested and hopefully spending the rest of his life in jail with infinite injustice, that just means that you have not grasped what infinite injustice could even be like. And yeah, that's kind of my take on it, but keep going.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And you take a look at it and you say, and once again, I think there was there's a Harvard economist named Roland Fryer who did a study in Houston, Texas about whether or not the police were more likely to kill black suspects. And they found that they were not. They did find that they were more likely to use physical force. Yeah. Okay, which you can make your own judgments about. And the study is very interesting. You can go read it. But yeah, and I think it points to some real problems in the United States with policing, especially with, African-American communities. But to say that we have these sweeping racism that is just underlying and prevailing, it turns into this boogeyman to me. It's like we want to just point at it for every possible situation. It's like, why, why did George Floyd get killed? Well, it's like instantly it has to be about race. It's like, well, what if, he's just an asshole. Like, what if not the police officer, not George Floyd.
Yeah.
But what if the police officer is just an asshole who thinks it's fun to torture, people? Well, it turns out they had a history. So he probably was just like, I don't like this guy. I'm going to, I hope he can't hardly breathe. And it's a horrible thing to do. But there's no proof that he was mad at him, one, because he was black. There's no proof that he intended to kill the guy. No. He was definitely at least negligent in his actions and deserves to be punished for it. But yeah.
For me, and I've, in the last couple of weeks, I probably changed my Black Lives Matter opinion to quite the degree. For me, the problem with it is what we hear on the streets and in the protest is police brutality, and every instance that where a black person has been killed by a white police officer, which are tragic cases, but it's about, I think, 5 to 10 people a year get shot when they're unarmed by police, which is tragic. But compared, looking at 300 million people, it's not that they're literally hunted every time they leave the house, which is a position that a lot of people claim. If you look at the next level, for me, that's kind of, and this is very racist to bring up apparently, but it's black on black crime. 7,500 people a year get shot by other black people. Like, there's obviously issues in those community, how much that is them being poor and how much of it is single motherhood or whatever, like also very deep water topics. But yeah, we talked about that in episode 2. But then the next level for me, and which because nobody talks about even the black on black crime, but then the mass incarceration, that's for me at the heart of it all, because that's not 5 to 10 people. That's not 7,500 people. That's 1.5 million black people rotting away in jail. And that is, I guess, even that argument is probably seen as racist by some people, because I'm not screaming at the 5 people that were killed by white police officers. But there's literally millions of people rotting away in jail, and we're looking at the handful of instances, because those are obviously the big problem. I just don't get that. Like, for me, like, talk about mass incarceration, like, all day long. I'll fucking protest with you. I'll be right there, because that is fucked. You can't just put people in jail for corporations to profit off. That's not, none of that is okay. But talk about that, not about I don't want to call it smaller issue, but I don't know. The numbers just don't add up for me.
Yeah, well, and there are factions of this movement, and I don't think it's the average person who's doing it, but there are definitely large swaths of people in the movement that don't want real solutions, that want to be out there and just to have a reason to go and riot in the streets. It's like, think about, and it's not a shot at Black Lives Matter. Anytime you're having, an anarchic situation, it's like, think about the type of people that attracts. The people that already wanted to do bad things are going to tend to flock to those movements and those things, because it gives them an opportunity to act in a way that they feel morally justified now, and acting in a way that they wanted to act in the entire time. And that's where you see, even though it makes no sense, you see, people burning down black-owned businesses. And you see, there's an apartment that got lit on fire and they blocked the fire trucks from going. It's like, how is that, there are black people in this apartment building. Like, how does that help if you care about Black lives, right? And obviously the people who are doing that don't. And I don't think any real proponent of Black Lives Matter would say that they would, right? But you have to be careful, what your movement ends up doing. It matters.
It definitely does. And it's, as I said, because every aspect of my worldview basically has changed in the last few weeks. So it's just, everything is so complex. And even a movement like Black Lives Matter, which on the surface, like, obviously that's something that everybody should support. But if you look deeper into it, there's a lot of aspects of it that are just dangerous. But I feel like people are not really focusing on that much. Easy question, small question in between before I want to do one last big topic change. What's your take on the November elections and how it affects our relations to China, as well as the race issue in America right now, or in general? Who do you think is gonna win, and what is it gonna do to our situation?
Well, I still think Trump's gonna win, despite Biden leading in all the polls. And mostly I just think that because I think that the conservative side of the aisle has very much identified with this. We are the silent majority. And they don't want to be polled. They don't want people to know what they think. And as a matter of fact, they've been criticized pretty heavily for saying what they think, openly. And so, yeah, I think the polls are off. I think that Trump will win decently well. I don't know that it'll be a landslide, but I would say Trump is probably doing a lot better than people think.
Okay.
And if that happens, then you're going to see 4 more years of the same. There's going to be people protesting that he won. There's going to be people complaining about every thing that they can. That unfortunately there's people that just will do that. And for any president. But yeah, and it'll continue forward kind of on the path we're on. That concerns me less than if Biden wins, personally, because I think that Biden will be a lot softer on China than Trump has been. Trump has been very hard on China, and it's very unpopular that he's so hard on China, actually. But he has been, and he's the first president that ever stood up and said, "Hey, you're really stealing our intellectual property rights, and if you don't stop, we're going to start slapping tariffs on you," which needed to happen for a long, long time. So
the only problem with Trump, that's not the only problem, but the big problem I have with Trump is that he's just a liar. Like, that's all presidential things aside, and it seems like he enjoys throwing gasoline into any fire that he can find, but he's just a liar. And like what he says, he just doesn't seem to care about truth as much, and that's kind of my big.
Sure.
Yeah.
So one thing you'll notice as soon as you bring up Trump to anybody is they have to tell you about how much they don't like him as a person or don't think he has good moral fiber. And it's like, yeah, like, don't get me wrong, I don't think he's like the best guy to go have a beer with. But when I vote, I don't vote based off of who I like as a person. I vote based off of policy personally. And so that's why Trump will have have my vote in the next election, and we'll see how that goes. But I think people will be surprised.
I wouldn't know who to vote for. Like I wouldn't know, because I've been trying to get into American politics now for months and trying to understand and try to get both sides, and it's just so complex. Like, maybe any advice for people that are, I mean, I feel like most Americans have already decided on who they're going to vote for, but any advice, like how would somebody even go about finding out what the people actually stand for? Because looking at different sources, you're just going to find all different kinds of things. How would you approach that if you weren't sure who to vote for?
Well, you have 4 years of Trump policy to look at, and you have 20 plus years for however long Biden has been in Congress there, that you can look at his voting record. And what I would say is that pick an issue that really matters to you. Like, pick something that really matters, and go find out who stands on your side of the aisle. I don't know why we do this thing where we're always like, well, I don't like him, or he seems flaky, or he's like you're not. The person matters, don't get me wrong, because how they present themselves, it does matter, and it's going to affect our relationships with our allies.
Yeah.
But what matters even more is what they decide. Like their personality is never going to impact you personally, but their decisions that they make and the things that they push through Congress can directly impact your life in many ways. So to me, that's what's important.
Okay, so yeah, the last question I have is a completely different direction. I guess in a way we're both very similar. Like, we're looking at, or we like to look at rational reasoning, facts, etc. Like, we're not butthurt if there's some facts that we don't, or we might be butthurt, but we will still agree with the facts as such. If you look at human experience, though, like I guess there's two ways of looking at it. That the world is a place of objects, where materialism, where we look at rational functioning, etc. But there's also the other side, which is not as much talked about, where we see the world as a forum for action, where we actually have the whole spiritual aspects of reality, etc. And I would just be very interesting what you, as a probably very, very rational person and very into the I guess rational functionings of the world, what's your approach on the other side of human experience, like on the spiritual side of things? I'd be very interested.
Sure. So you're talking about like religiously or like
I guess religion could be a way of doing it. Basically, how I was told
yeah.
what the difference basically is that in the rational world is materialism. So we have science, etc. But there's certain things where science just can't help you anymore. I think it's kind of, I call it like the border of where how far reasoning can go. And there's certain phenomena where you just can't explain anymore. One of my favorite ways of putting it is Carl Jung, where he says like the collective unconscious, and we have our archetypes, etc. Religion is definitely one way of dealing with it. Basically, it's
Sure.
stories like how do you choose your narrative? How do you how do you act in the world? Basically, like what's your approach on that front?
Yeah. Yeah. So one, I think that we all think in stories. I think that's a really good, way to put it. I think that no matter what, as rational as we try and be, there is a natural instinct that's like you're the hero of your own story,
Yeah.
and that it's always going to be that way. But yeah, as far as on the spiritual side of things, I'm so agnostic on this. I don't know. I don't know that I need to know to navigate the world. Right? Is kind of my take. It's like, look, I think that there is bigger things out there that I will never understand. But even the things I can understand, I struggle to get through.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So you just kind of try to avoid it, or not focus too much on like focusing how to, like what you can understand, but you kind of try to focus more on what you can understand and leave the other things out the park in a way.
Yeah, I try and take I think like the Stoic method of you separate everything into two camps. It's the things you can control and things you
Yeah.
can't. And you can spend all day focusing on the things you can't control. But the reality is this is not rational because you can't control them anyway.
Yeah.
And you have no say. So right now I'm just trying to get the things in my life that I can control under control. And once I do that, maybe I'll have some more time for the things I can't control.
Very interesting. Okay, I was just interested. Yeah, any last words? Otherwise I'm gonna close it and thank you.
Yeah, hey, thanks so much for having me on. I've had a great time, and hopefully I didn't ramble too much on you guys, and it was a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun for me as well. Thank you very much.